Welcome to Mindshift, I'm Brandon, and we've done it. Today is episode 39 of my secular Bible study series in which we cover Malachi. This is the last book in the Protestant Old Testament canon. And I have a good video planned for you here today, but I want to take a quick segment of this and talk about my plans for the New Testament. First of all, I understand that the New Testament videos, I'm guessing, will get a lot more attention than these that have been done for the last 39 episodes. With that attention, I just want to make sure everything is as buttoned up as possible. I'm considering if I want to change up the order from canon order to something more like chronological. Should I be jumping around between, say, the Pseudo-Pauline epistles and the epistles that we know to be authentic? Do I want to do the Gospels in the order that they were written or in the evolution of the character of Jesus, or again, just in canon order? Do I want to group some of these books like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John together, or continue to have one episode per? Do I want to just take a month to talk about the Gospels over and over and over, all at the same time, so we can do the comparisons better? There are so many things that I'm thinking about in terms of how I want to do this. And the reason I bring all this up is just to say, it's possible that this time next week there will be a Matthew video or whatever book I choose to start with. It's also possible I'm going to take a little 2 or 3 week break to get my bearings. This has been a lot, coming up with an episode each week off each book of the Bible for the last 40 weeks. I think I've only missed one. So bear with me as I figure out how to address the New Testament. But let's end well. Let's talk about Malachi. This is quite the little book, and we are, again, not dealing with the main 7 topics that we cover. We're just going to talk about it. It's only 4 chapters, and we'll be going through chapter by chapter, but let's set the stage for this book. This is the post-exilic period, so the people have come back. They have rebuilt the temple. We are about 100 years after exile at this point, so think of the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, and we are seeing the disillusionment that the people have, and for good reason. You know, I want you to picture that you are at this point a few generations into being back in your homeland. You've heard the stories about the time of captivity in Babylon. Most all of the Old Testament canon has been written, and you have access to quite a bit of it, even if it is just someone reading it aloud to you at the temple or using it on certain holy days. You've heard about all the great prophets, all the great men, all the great miracles, all the victories, all the defeats, all the times when God was so real, the grandeur of Solomon's temple, God's roaring presence in it, the deliverance from captivity. But to you, this is just normal everyday life. And you're still being called to tithe and to sacrifice animals and perform these rituals. And it doesn't quite feel or seem like everything you've read or heard about. And so you start going through the motions a little bit. Things haven't been going so well for you. You're not exactly thriving. It seems like a lot of God's promises have failed, and also that many people who are not following God's promises or doing His will are doing just fine. Now, the Christians love this message because they can point to it as today's society and look at how God will deal with us via what we see here in Malachi. But I think more than anything, Christians should be able to relate to this as we hear so much about this God, and then where is He? It doesn't seem like He's fulfilling everything that I've heard or expected. And these people were definitely in that situation, but don't worry because we have Malachi. My messenger is what Malachi means. And so there is some debate on the authorship. Was there really a prophet named Malachi, or is this a compilation of messages and text that is just put under this name of the messenger? And the frame of the book is that of disputations. We have 5 or 6 main disputes coming from the people, although it's coming from God kind of speaking for the people. He'll say something like, I love you, but you question if I love you, and then He'll give an answer to that. There's a lot of rhetorical questions and God monologuing here. So that's pretty much the setup. I think we're going to get into the chapters themselves. We'll start talking about these individual disputes. I'm going to be reading to you some of the problematic passages as we go through, and we should get through this pretty quick here. So it starts with chapter 1, the Lord's love for Israel. In verse 2, it says, I have loved you, says the Lord. But you say, how have you loved us? Now listen to God's answer. Is not Esau Jacob's brother, declares the Lord? Yet I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. I have laid waste his hill country and left his heritage to jackals of the desert. If Edom, the people of Esau, says, we are shattered, but we will rebuild the ruins, the Lord of hosts says, they may build, but I will tear down, and they will be called the wicked country, and the people with whom the Lord is angry forever. Your own eyes shall see this, and you shall say, Great is the Lord beyond the border of Israel. Listen to the God that is supposed to be the embodiment of love. How does he show his love for Israel, Jacob? By showing how much he has not loved Jacob's brother, who Israel thinks less of. Esau and Edom were these taboo words, the bad side, the black sheep of the family. And he's saying, look, I got to choose. How have I not shown you love? I chose you, Jacob. I chose you, Israel. I hated your brother. That's why it's so funny to me when I made that video in response to the Super Bowl ad about Jesus didn't teach love, he taught hate, because he says something similar, to be ready to hate brother and sister, mother and father, to leave your family behind. And everyone says, oh, it's hyperbole. It's just about having the right hierarchy. It's about having the right intentions to live for Christ. And that's all fine and well, except that this God himself demonstrates this firsthand when questioned about how he shows his love. It's by his hate, his utter disdain, his ruining of the plan and the people and the name of the enemy. To force Israel to concede, well, yeah, he really has done all those horrible things to Esau, to Edom, so he must love us. How disgusting. It's like with my two kids, if I told my daughter I loved her so much, and she said, but you don't show it. And I said, look at how bad I've treated your brother. How do I not show it? Like, what an insane response. And buckle up, because this is just pretty much the entire book here. In verse 6, we move on to the second part of chapter 1, which is the priest's polluted offerings. Again, even the priest, and especially the people at this time, but there's more responsibility on the priest, have been giving bad offerings. They've been giving the sick sheep. And listen to God here. He's pretty upset. A son honors his father, and a servant his master. If then I am a father, where is my honor? And if I am a master, where is my fear? I also love the admittance here, not only of slavery, of course, but what is the proper position for a slave or servant for their master? One of fear. And how are we supposed to show our wisdom? By fearing God, because he is our master. It's all right here, and it's all too telling. So we get our second dispute, and it sounds like this. O priest who despise my name, but you say, how have we despised your name? By offering polluted food upon my altar. But you say, how have we polluted you? By saying that the Lord's table may be despised. When you offer blind an animal in sacrifice, is that not evil? And when you offer those that are lame or sick, is that not evil? And he goes on from here. I mean, the definition of evil being used here is not for the fact that there are slaves, is not for the fact that God just randomly chose to hate Esau and make sure that as a people group they would never succeed. It's when he gets a sick goat on the altar. That's evil. And if you're thinking to yourself, this is all Old Testament nonsense, this doesn't represent Jesus, this isn't the personal relationship I have, I know better than this is not how God is, who are you to argue with his word? And he's going to give you an extra piece of his mind when it comes to that kind of thinking here in just a minute, so hang tight. Skipping down to the middle part of verse 10, just so you can hear God say this, I have no pleasure in you, says the Lord of hosts, and I will not accept an offering from your hand. For from the rising of the sun to its setting, my name will be great among the nations, and in every place incense will be offered to my name, and a pure offering. For my name will be great among the nations, says the Lord of hosts. Again, this little God of this one chosen people group, not getting what he wants, saying, forget it. You don't please me anyways. Go ahead and try to make new sacrifices. I'm not going to accept them. Don't you know I'm great? My name will be great. Like, it's such a temper tantrum. It's so man-made. He says it again later on, for I am a great king, says the Lord of hosts, and my name will be feared among the nations. Who is he really trying to remind here? So let's move on to chapter 2. The Lord continues to rebuke the priest in this chapter, and it starts off by him threatening curses, and then he says in verse 3, behold, I will rebuke your offspring, and spread dung on your faces, the dung of your offerings, and you shall be taken away with it. So shall you know that I have sent this command to you, that my covenant with Levi may stand, says the Lord of hosts. And listen to him describe this covenant. I gave them to him. It was a covenant of fear, and he feared me. And this is when God was saying, in the good old days. So God's just not getting that healthy dose of fear that he thrives off of. Thus, he has to send out more curses now to the offspring. So we're back and forth with if God thinks it's okay to curse the next generations or have this sort of collective punishment. And even the words here, again, how little. I will rebuke your offspring and spread dung on your faces, the dung of your offerings. Like, he's just so very petty. I don't know how else to describe him. It goes on like that for most of the first part of chapter 2. It then moves on to Judah profaning the covenant, and he points out to them how horrible they are. And down in verse 13 of chapter 2, he says, "And the second thing you do, you cover the Lord's altar with tears, with weeping and groaning, because he no longer regards the offering or accepts it with favors from your hand. But when you say, 'Why does he not?' And here comes the Lord's answer, 'Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Did he not make them one with a portion of the Spirit in their union? And what was the one God seeking? Godly offspring." But this is interesting because it starts here in 13 with God being upset by the people once they do try to make good sacrifices. Like he said before, he's not accepting them anymore. He takes no pleasure in them. So kind of between a rock and a hard place. You're being chastised by God for not giving better offerings. You hear the rebuke. You take upon the curse. You're told the only way to get it lifted is to make good sacrifices. You start doing that. He doesn't care anymore, which is the wrong time to try to rebuke your people. And now he's upset that they're sad about that. It's a lose. And when they say, "Well, come on, what do you want me to do? Why are you doing this?" All of a sudden, out of left field, he throws at them, and this is confusing, and this is the best that I can understand this. I'm definitely open to different context here, but from what I understand, this generation had started to marry outside of the Israelite people, and they were taking on these other women with these other gods, and they were bringing those gods into their household and worshiping those gods. And we know God hates nothing more, but this is a very different side of God, because he says, "All I wanted was godly offspring, but you who have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant." The faithless there meaning divorced her. And it's amazing. Go back to Ezra and read. This is like the same time frame, the same situation. Ezra comes back in one of the waves from captivity. He sees this intermarrying. He loses his mind on behalf of God, forces these people to get divorces, and sends the women and children outside the city. AKA, they're just going to die without the resources of a man or the inclusion of the tribe. But here we have God saying, "You didn't even uphold your covenant. All I wanted were godly children." This would almost be a pretty thing if it wasn't in such contradiction to what we see happening in Ezra, and also that God is punishing, if we go back up to what we read, the children for the sins of the father. He does care about the children or he doesn't. This is pretty baffling to me. And again, to be more clear in verse 16, "For the man who does not love his wife but divorces her, says the Lord, the God of Israel, covers his garment with violence." So it is anger about the divorcing nature of this man, which tracks. I mean, Jesus says, "What God brought together, let no man take apart." But this intermarriage is directly against the law in a chapter where we're hearing about the importance of still following all the covenantal laws. It's pretty strange. Let's move on here. The end of chapter 2. "You have wearied the Lord with your words, but you say, 'How have we wearied him?' By saying, 'Everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in them,' or by asking, 'Where is the God of justice?'" I think this is so interesting. It's so apt for everything that we talk about on the channel. So they're looking around, they're seeing evil people succeeding. They're seeing themselves who are trying to do the right thing, giving these sacrifices again, divorcing wives that led them to worship false idols, which is like the least of what they should be doing. They should be killing them according to the actual law. And they're not seeing God reward them. They're seeing quite the opposite. They're still under these curses and this inaction and this lesser being, this lesser temple, this lesser presence than everything that they were promised and told to remember. And so I think the question is just fine. Where is this God of justice? And so how does God answer this? Well, we move right into chapter 3 for the answer. "Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way for me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming, and who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire, like a fuller's soap, and they will bring offerings in righteousness to the Lord. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Lord, as in the days of old, as in the former years." So ultimately what he's saying here is the way he's going to bring justice for these people that want it, cut down everyone who is not righteous. And isn't this God's MO? I mean, look at the flood. He saves the righteous so they can start again. That time it was 8 people. When you have Sodom and Gomorrah, you get Lot and his family that get out. He is a God who lets things go for a while, sees the wickedness, refines it, meaning to burn off that which is not good, as the analogy goes, so that he is left with a proper and healthy remnant. We've heard him talk about this through many, many, many books. And he's stating as much with that hint of a threat, as always, right? What is true justice to God? What is true worship and glory? To have your people so broken by all of your curses that despite whether you're honoring your promises or showing up or not, they should always be in a position on their knees in awe and in fear. What a loving Father. And then we get this very important verse as we think about the context here and as we think about all the covenants and we think about all the curses and blessings. Verse 6, chapter 3. For I, the Lord, do not change. Now, we should already know the immutability of God just by the philosophical concept of God. If this God is outside of time and space, what is the blip of a dot of a couple hundred years or a couple thousand years? Nothing. To think that this God ebbs and flows with the culture or the time or the current morals would be silly. And yet that is the excuse we so often get when we are told that the Old Testament really has no bearing. We're under a new covenant. We're moving on here to Matthew. Within just paragraphs left before we start the New Testament, we get a reminder that God does not change. Meaning, if he felt this way about something once, he still does. I know what it's like. I've been a Christian for so long who knew the Old Testament, knew it well, knew it existed, believed it, but also just thought, that's him, but that's not him. That's not what he cares about. He's my good father. He wants a relationship with me. Look what he did with Jesus. He's trying to pave a way. He's got a plan for me. He just cares about me. He wants me to be with him for eternity. And you completely idealize this God in direct opposition to who he says he is, the issues he says he cares about, the results he wants to see from the people who follow him. By the way, all of this is just for the Jews anyways. That's been made very clear when we look at how the book starts with his hate for Esau. But we do get this verse, and I think it is a huge thing to remember as we talk about these issues. And right afterwards, he accuses the people of robbing him. And he says this, in your tithes and your contributions, you are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Now that's the part that doesn't get said as much when the preachers preach about tithe. They usually start in the middle of verse 10 with this, and thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing until there is no more need. You will see pastor after pastor after pastor after pastor as they cover money once a month or once a quarter, whatever their little church plan is, bring this up as encouragement or kind of chastising their people. Look, you're robbing God. This is his words, not mine. And not only are you robbing God, sinning, but if you would just obey him, he actually wants to bless you. He says, test me. He says, I will pour down the blessings until there is no more need. But it might as well be a fortune cookie, because some people who tithe go completely destitute. Some people stay the same, and some people continue to increase their income. But you'll never hear of two of those situations during the testimonies of believers. You will only hear about the people who tithed and got that strange check in the mail, of the people that tithed and got the promotion at work, as if these things could not have happened if they were not giving away 10% of their things. And then, of course, you have the Christians that say, yeah, tithing is Old Testament. That's a command for the Jews, Levitical law, Mosaic law, all the different ways that they describe why it doesn't apply to them. And they'll just talk about it really being more optional. It's kind of an offering thing here. But yet, even if they believe that, they still use this verse to say, but if we do choose to do that, God's going to honor that. Why? It is either a covenantal thing that is not for you at all, or it's literal for everyone forever. You cannot have it both ways. And then God always has this big utopian idea. After all of this, if everything goes right, if you guys just start tithing to me, if you fear me again, if you obey me, then all the nations will call you blessed, for you will be a land of delight, says the Lord of hosts. There's always this idea that all the nations are going to see what Israel is doing, and they're going to be like, man, can't argue with the results. This God must be real. And here we are thousands of years later, and this is simply not been the case, nor is the case. I've lost track of where we're at on the disputes, but we have this one. You have said, it is vain to serve God. What is the profit of our keeping his charge, or walking as in the morning before the Lord of hosts? And now we call the arrogant blessed. Evildoers not only prosper, but they put God to the test and they escape. So the people are immediately calling God out, or God is handling this objection before it can come up and saying, okay, you said all that, but that's not been the case. There are people not tithing, there are people doing evil, there are people divorcing their wives, and yet they prosper. They've put you to the test and they're fine. You're not doing what you say you're going to do. So why should we continue to try so hard, and or why are we under your curse for being in the same boat? God's answer to this is pretty strange. He gets like a case study group and he wants to make them an example. This happens in verse 16. Then those who feared the Lord spoke with one another. The Lord paid attention and heard them, and a book of remembrance was written before him of those who feared the Lord and esteemed his name. They shall be mine, says the Lord of hosts, in the day when I will make up my treasured possession, and I will spare them as a man spares his son who serves him. This once more you shall see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves God and the one who does not serve him. And so ultimately what I think this is, and then we're about to wrap up here with chapter 4, ultimately, what this book of remembrance is like there's a small amount of people that have already been through the refining process that do fear God, and God is pointing to them and giving them credit. Like, let's put together this book. This is a honorary book of people that I'm not going to forget about. Yes, the evil might prosper now, and yes, it might seem like the people who are obeying me are on hard times, but let's remember these people. There's going to be that day. Remember how I keep telling you there's this day, it's soon, be patient. If it seems slow, like just wait. I keep alluding to the fact, even though most of you have died since I've been saying this, I keep alluding to the fact there's going to be this special day when everyone gets their comeuppance. So if you're in the book, gotcha. And if you're not, like maybe look at that book for inspiration and just know, like, I'm going to get the last word in the end, which is essentially also, at least it's consistent with the New Testament where so many other things are not, kind of the whole system of hell and heaven. We even have, the Lamb's book of life that your name needs to be written in, kind of a book of remembrance of who is going to be taken care of by God when that fateful day finally comes. Except here it's meant to be much more literal and not so futuristic. But again, when these things don't happen, you kind of have to keep extending the goalpost for God. And the book ends with chapter 4, the great day of the Lord. Now this is pretty strange. Let's get into it. For behold, the day is coming, burning like an oven, when all the arrogant and all the evil doers will be stubble. The day that is coming shall set them ablaze, says the Lord of hosts, so that it will leave them neither root nor branch. But you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N, this is not pointing to Jesus, shall rise with healing in its wings. You shall go out leaping like calves from the stall, and you shall tread down the wicked, for they will be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day that I will act, says the Lord of hosts. So more future promising to make up for all of this, followed by verse 4. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the statutes and the rules that I have commanded him at Horeb for all Israel. So there's a couple verses left. We're going to get to them. I just want to point out really quick, one of the most important things God is saying to his people, right after he's done saying, I, the Lord, do not change, right after he's promising a future day when he will make everything right, to be included in the group that gets accepted on that day, that doesn't have justice and destruction done to them, you need to do what? Remember the law of my servant Moses, because this God hasn't changed. It's the only thing he cares about. And again, who would he be talking to here? Simply the Jews, right? You can't have it these both ways. You can't say, this is the old covenant, this is the old law, and then be excited about the future day of the Lord. If you don't follow the law of Moses because you think you're exempt from it because of Jesus, you don't have the day of the Lord to be waiting for. Except for those that interpret this as the day of the Lord is actually when Jesus came, thus the new covenant, thus why we are no longer bound by the laws of Moses, except that doesn't really hold up, because all these other things that are supposed to happen about all the nations witnessing this as correct and turning towards God and having the idyllic peace and turning the sword into plowshares because people won't even know how to do war anymore, all of the things that have been prophesied and promised did not happen with Jesus. They simply did not. So the best you can do, if you're actually being consistent with the text, is kind of what the Jews have done. Jesus wasn't it. We're still waiting on that. And in the meantime, we're still bound by the law. Christianity makes less and less sense the more you actually understand these texts. And it ends with this: Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. and he will turn the hearts of fathers to their children and the hearts of children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. So we've always got that, you know what, but just in case, hear me out. I'm going to reserve for myself the right to completely destroy everything. But otherwise, what's he going to do? I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day. Now, I don't know about you. I've never seen Elijah come on the scene. And what so many Christians do is they point to the end here, verse 4, remember the law, and verse 5, I will send you Elijah the prophet. And they say, yep, the law and the prophet. That's, the things coming before the day of the Lord. Then you get that remark from Jesus that he's here to fulfill the law and the prophet. And they're like, see, it was Jesus. It was always pointing towards Jesus. Does it say I'm going to send a new prophet? Does it say I'm going to send you a new Elijah, a new Moses? No. It says, remember the law of Moses, and I will send you Elijah. Not someone like Elijah, not a prophet better than Elijah, not my son, not someone named Jesus. I will send Elijah. You can't make anything more of that. And yet it is where we get so many ideas about the fulfillment of the day of the Lord coming via his son, Jesus the Christ. And that's it. And then we just conveniently go to the New Testament and we start trying to map as many things back onto the Old Testament via Jesus as possible and getting Christianity. But this part, all of this has not been about Jesus. All of this was about Judaism. All of this was about a chosen people, not Gentiles, and a covenant they had with their God. So, thank you for making it through the Old Testament with me. Let me know any thoughts you have on the book of Malachi, any thoughts you have on the distinction between the Old and New Covenants, the Old and New Testament. And again, within reason, give me any suggestions you think are positive and helpful for how to cover the New Testament books as we dive into them. Until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank all of my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, and Boris, GVI, Jacob, Joe, Martin, Oliver, Perry, Rokkit, and Shawn, my Humanist heroes, Jarrod and Kristi, my Atheist advocates, Caleb, Imposter, Jeff, Jeffrey, Karen, Sparky, and Todd, as well as all of my Secular Scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people.